Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I am the American Haunted Historian, Alan Searcy. Glad you guys are with me today. Got a fun show. I plan on doing something on Kansas City, someplace I've never really covered, but I've been to Missouri, 4 or 5 different times. I love going to the Midwest. A lot of just weird, wild history in the Midwest. I'm looking forward to this one. But hey, right off the top, make sure you guys are following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I have the big book giveaway going on. This is actually the last week for it. I'm giving away 5 books to 5 listeners. All you got to do is subscribe to the show, leave a review, and then screenshot the review and send it to Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook or Instagram. I'll pick 5 random winners. It could be, you could pick the books, Southern Ghost Stories, New Orleans. It could be Hexed, Below the Trestle, First Lady of Tennessee. Whatever you guys want, I'm picking 5 winners and you get to pick the book. So I guess let's just jump right into the show, shall we? So April 2nd, 1988. It was a Saturday afternoon in Hyde Park, neighborhood of Kansas City. It was the kind of place with old Victorian homes and mature oak trees, quiet, unassuming. But that silence was shattered when a 22-year-old man named Chris Bryson jumped from a second-story window at 4315 Charlotte Street. He was naked, except for a dog collar around his neck. He was battered, bleeding, and terrified. When he reached the sidewalk, he didn't just run. He looked for anyone who could save him from the man inside that house. Bryson told the police a story, and they couldn't wrap their heads around it. He'd been held captive for 4 days, drugged and tortured by a man the neighborhood knew very well. A man who was a local chef, neighborhood watch chairman, and he was a fixture at the local flea market. Everybody knew this guy. His name was Robert Berdella, and as the police began to search his home, they realized Bryson wasn't the first. They were standing in the House of Horrors, and they were about to meet the man the press would soon call the Kansas City Butcher. To understand the shock that hit Kansas City, you have to understand who Bob Berdella was to the public. He wasn't a drifter. He was a homeowner. He was a talented chef who helped start a training program for aspiring cooks. But his most visible role was the Westport Flea Market. He had a stall there called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. And the bazaar was exactly what it sounded like. Cult books, shrunken heads, antiques from across the globe, and even human skulls. In a strange twist of irony, during the NCAA Final Four tournament in Kansas City, he displayed 4 skulls in his window with a sign that read, "The Final Four." People thought it was just some kind of macabre art. They had no idea they were looking at the remains of missing men. So he was also a leader. He headed the South Hyde Park Crime Prevention and Neighborhood Association. He literally walked the streets telling people how to keep their homes safe from predators. All the while, he was bringing men into his home to destroy them. Berdella later admitted his inspiration came from the 1965 film The Collector, based on the John Fowles novel. It's about a man who kidnaps a woman to add her to his collection. Berdella told investigators these were his darkest fantasies becoming reality. His first known victim was 19-year-old Jerry Howell in 1984. Berdella lured him with the promise of a job, but he drugged him with animal tranquilizers. And this became the pattern. Over the next 4 years, at least 6 men, Robert Sheldon, Mark Wallace, James Ferris, Todd Stoops, and Larry Pearson, they all would enter 4315 Charlotte Street and never leave. And we got to be objective here. Berdella was a sadist, but he was also a bureaucrat of death. He kept torture logs, meticulous, handwritten journals documenting every drug dose, every reaction, and every minute of his victim's suffering. He took over 200 Polaroid photos. He wasn't just killing, he was conducting experiments. He would keep men captive for weeks. Todd Stoops was held for nearly a month. Berdella even left for work or to run errands while they were bound in his house, confident the drugs and restraints would keep it secret. When police finally raided the house after Bryson's escape, the logs and Polaroids provided a roadmap to his crimes. But there were no bodies. Berdella had dismembered the victims in his bathtub and put the remains in trash bags for the city's regular garbage pickup. It wasn't until they started digging in the backyard that they found physical proof: human skulls and bone fragments. Facing the death penalty, Berdella did something rare for a serial killer. He talked. In exchange for life in prison, he gave a 720-page confession. He detailed every murder with the coldness of a chef reciting a recipe. He didn't see himself as a monster. He famously said he was the neighbor next door who reached a point where he could do monstrous acts. Robert Berdella died in prison in 1992. He had a heart attack. He claimed the prison medical staff neglected his heart condition, a final irony from a man who showed zero mercy to those in his care. Today, 4315 Charlotte Street, it's now a vacant lot. The house was torn down shortly after its convention. And there is no plaque at the Westport Flea Market. But for those who lived in KC in the 80s, the name Berdella is a permanent scar on the city's history. It's a reminder that the most dangerous people aren't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're the ones chairing the neighborhood watch meeting, selling your antiques, or waving to you from their porch as you walk by. See, I love some true crime and just weird, wild stuff, but, our bread and butter were ghost stories, right? So here's a really fun one I found. So in 1858, if you stood on the front porch of the Alexander Major's house in Kansas City, you weren't just looking at a farm. You were looking at the edge of civilization. To the east was the burgeoning Missouri border, and to your west was the untamed Kansas territory. Alexander Majors was a titan of transit. He co-founded the Pony Express and ran a freighting empire that used 40,000 oxen. He was a man of God and grit, famously requiring his riders to sign an oath against swearing and drinking. But while the men he hired were legends of the West, the most famous spirit tied to the house isn't a rough-riding cowboy. It's a woman who refused to let the house die. So fast forward to the 1920s. The once grand Major's mansion was a shell of its former self. It had been used as a school, a farmhouse, and was dangerously close to being demolished. Enter Louisa Johnson, Alexander Major's great-granddaughter. Louisa was a woman of the 20th century, but her heart was in the 19th. She saw the peeling paint and the sagging floorboards not as a burden, but as a duty. She spent nearly 50 years of her life, and every cent she had, restoring the old home. She lived there, worked there, and effectively became the house's heartbeat. And she was known for being meticulous. If a chair was half-inch out of place from its original 1860s position, she knew about it. If a volunteer was being careless with a duster, she noticed. She didn't just restore a building, she anchored her soul to it. Louisa, she passed away in 1979. But the people who work at the Major's house today will tell you she never actually left. However, this isn't your typical horror movie haunting. There are no screams, no blood on the walls. Instead, volunteers report what they call the Louisa check-in. Imagine you're a staff member closing up for the night. You moved a rug, a vacuum, or maybe you left a window slightly unlatched. Suddenly, you smell a faint floral perfume, lavender, maybe rose, drifting through a room with no open windows. Or you hear the distant clack, clack, clack of heels on the floorboard in the room directly above you. Many believe Louisa is still there at the house. There are stories of heavy furniture being found moved back to its proper place overnight, or cold spots that appear only when someone's being disrespectful to the history of the home. Louisa, she's a protective ghost. She isn't trying to scare you. She's trying to make sure you're doing your job. So we often think of ghosts as tragic figures trapped by some violent end, but Louisa Johnson's story suggests something else. Sometimes love for a place is so strong it leaves a permanent imprint on the atmosphere. Alexander Majors, he built the house to conquer the West, but Louisa Johnson stayed to conquer time. If you ever visit the house on State Line Road, watch your step, mind the antiques, and if you smell a hint of lavender in an empty hallway, just know the caretaker's watching. But she's very glad you're there. Well, if you've listened to the show and if you've ever read my books, you guys know I'm a Civil War guy. I love the history, the battle between the states. Man, so much history there, especially in Middle Tennessee. But, Missouri was also kind of a hotbed for a lot of the fighting, too. So, the meat grinder at Brush Creek. And most people think of the Civil War as a Virginia thing or a Pennsylvania thing, Tennessee thing. But in October 1864, the bloodiest battle west of the Mississippi tore right through the front yards of Kansas City. It was called the Battle of Westport. Picture 30,000 men clashing in what is now Luce Park and the Country Club Plaza. It wasn't a clean, tactical fight. It was a desperate, mud-soaked slaughter. On one side, you had Major General Sterling Price, known as Old Pap. He was a former Missouri governor leading a ragged Army of Missouri, which consisted of 8,500 cavalrymen who were starving, exhausting, and dragging a 500-wagon loot train that moved like a snail in a grease pit. And blocking his path was Major General Samuel Curtis, commanding the Army of the Border. Curtis wasn't just some career soldier. He was a man defending his home turf with a mix of regulars and raw against his militia. He dug in at the bluffs above Brush Creek, right where the high-end shops of the plaza sit today, and he waited for Price to walk into the trap. So the morning of October 23rd, it was a bloodbath. Price's boys actually managed to push the Union line back across the creek. For a few hours, it looked like the rebels might actually break through and take the state. But Price was being squeezed. While he was fighting Curtis in the front, Major General Alfred Pleasanton, a guy who had survived the hell of Gettysburg, was slamming at the Confederate rear with fresh cavalry. The turning point didn't come from a brilliant general, though it came from a local farmer named George Thoman. The Union forces were pinned down by Confederate artillery on the heights, so Thoman showed General Curtis a hidden gully, an old cow path that led right up the side of the bluffs. Curtis snuck his cannons up that path and opened up a flanking fire that shredded the rebel line. By noon, the retreat was on. The Iron Brigade, led by the legendary Joe Shelby, had to fight a suicidal rearguard action through the Wornall farm just to keep the entire rebel army from being wiped off the map. By sunset, 3,000 men were dead or bleeding out in the Kansas City mud. Old Pap, Price's dream of a southern Missouri, was dead. The war in the West was over. But for the Wornall family, the nightmare was just moving into their living room. John Wornall, he was a peaceful farmer, but his brick mansion was the sturdiest thing for miles. The surgeons moved in before the bodies were even cold. They kicked the family into the cellar and turned the dining room into an operating theater. And you have to understand what medical care meant in 1864. There was no scrub-in, no anesthesia, very little anesthesia. Surgeons worked until they were standing ankle-deep in blood. They'd saw through a Union soldier's leg, wipe the blade on their apron, and move straight to a Confederate soldier. In the chaos, they didn't have time for burials. They piled limbs outside the windows. The screams from that house were so loud they reportedly drowned out the sounding of the retreating cavalry. And when the Wornalls finally came up from the basement, the floorboards were saturated with blood, and they had to be scrubbed for weeks. And even then, the stains wouldn't go away. So let's fast forward to today. The Wornall House is a museum, but it's one where the exhibits sometimes walk around. The most common report? The smell. People will be standing in the parlor, looking at a portrait, and suddenly they're hit with a thick, heavy cloud of pipe tobacco. Not modern cigarette smoke. This is that old sweet cherry blend leaf. It's the smell of a man trying to calm his nerves for a surgery. He knows he won't survive. Then there are the sentinels. Multiple witnesses, including skeptics who've been there for a tour. They've looked up at the second-story balcony and seen a man in a tattered gray coat. He isn't transparent or glowing like something out of a movie. He looks solid. He's a man. He's there, leaning there, staring out towards what used to be the battlefield. One staff member once walked into a room to find a man in a Union blue uniform sitting on the edge of a bed, and she thought he was a reenactor. She asked him if he needed some help. He looked at her with eyes that looked 1,000 miles away, quote unquote, and simply, he just wasn't there anymore. And why does this house stay so active? Most paranormal activities think it's because of the sheer density of the trauma. And when you have that much concentrated agony in one spot, it leaves a residual haunt. It's like a record player stuck in a groove, playing the same 3 seconds just over and over and over and over. But the Wornall House, it's not trying to scare you. It's just holding on to memory that the rest of KC has tried to pave over with shopping malls and parking lots. So the next time you're driving down Wornall Road, look up at the windows. Someone might be looking back, still waiting for the order to retreat. So I told you guys about the Southern Ghost Stories Facebook and Instagram pages. I get questions. I've been trying to get you guys some questions in. I plan on doing a Q&A episode probably in a few weeks. But I got one. I think it was last week I was talking about ghost stories. Everybody's got a story. I've written books for a long time. Been to a lot of haunted places. Seen a lot of weird, creepy things. So I talked about some things that happened to me in houses I lived in Nashville. And they asked me, hey, what else have you seen? So, I try to keep a show around 20 or 30 minutes, but something I thought was really wild in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I have a book, Southern Ghost Stories, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. There's a house right off the square. It's called the Childress House. And it belonged to Mr. Childress. He was the brother of Sarah Childress Polk, John Polk's brother-in-law. James K. Polk, the former president, was his brother-in-law. So weird things happen there. The lady who owns the house, I think it's like an Airbnb. She lives downstairs, and the rooms upstairs are for rent. So they would shoot her footsteps. Things get moved around the house. Weird things happen. So I went with a buddy of mine to do an investigation. Before I get too far ahead of myself, out there in one of the outbuildings, you can walk downstairs into the cellar. I guess like an old wine cellar or some old food storage area. But you walk a little ways, and you can see where it's bricked up. There was a tunnel at one point that went into a neighbor's, I guess, backyard or one of his outbuildings, like an escape route or something. But it's cool. You walk in and see it all bricked up. Anyway, it's a story for another day. So one of the weirdest things, there's an app for your phone that you can get. It's like a spirit box, echo box, something like that. And I was in the house, and I had a ghost hunter with me, but my buddy Mark. He's done a lot of this stuff. He has thousands of dollars worth of equipment. He knows what he's doing. So we were in one of the outbuildings, and I said, "What color is Mark's shirt?" And as soon as I said, "What color is his shirt?" the word black came from my iPad. Now, could there be some kid in China watching through my camera, hacked in, and he sees what he's wearing? I don't really know. But the wild thing was, we were in the dark. So even if somehow this app was able to look and see what he's wearing, some AI, I'm not sure how it works. And this is like several years before AI even became a thing. But it said black, and he was wearing a black shirt. And that's one of the really strangest things that happened to me researching that book. I heard voices in the slaughter pens over at the Stones River battlefield. Lots of just weird history in Murfreesboro. But, yeah, I just remember being there in that building with him. What color is Mark's shirt? Black. Just as plain as day. And even he got tickled at it. Like it was, because a lot of times, like I've had that app before. I've tried to, get to interact with whatever, and you never really get anything. But that day, black. It's plain as day. So, hey, make sure you guys are following Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook, Instagram. Send me questions. Hey, be sure to please leave a review. Like the show. Send me your review, screenshot it, and I'll give away some books. I just put the finishing touches on my next book, Pistols at Red River. It's a story about Andrew Jackson's the duel at Red River back in 1806. It was before he became president, before he was he was in the middle of his ascent. Or 1812 is when he really took off. So it was a few years before that. But what's wild is there's, the main duel is the duel at the Red River. There's also a duel before the duel that they had to have before they got to the main duel. It's a crazy book. A lot of just weird history, and it's right up my alley. So it's not a ghost story, but still, dudes wearing suits shooting each other in a field, man. That's just straight up badass in my book. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. It comes out April 30th. It's loaded into Ingram and Amazon, and I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, I'll see you guys here in a few days, and thanks for checking me out, and I'll see you soon. Check out the exclusive shirts from Monster City Madhouse, Gravestone, Rocktober, and Val Halloween. All that and much more at MonsterCityMadhouse.com.